Hello and most welcome to 1317 of the series, and I will finish off the article by Rodolphe Gasché here. We were just coming to the end of Floundering in Determination from the excellent collection edited by John Sallis, reading Heidegger. I will go back a little bit to put you into context. Yet Heidegger uses it, as he does so many other variations of the word, these different variations of Bestimmung and Stimmung, inescapably. He must do so and thus flounder in commonness. However, the thinker would have to account for such floundering by exhibiting the language slide between the proper and the improper. But what if no habitual meaning of determination is to be found? The model of essential derivation to which Stimmung yields in being and time, and which makes it such a powerful synthetic tool, seems to be either too finely or too loosely knit. To loosely knit a synthesis to account for the paradoxically inevitable improper use that Heidegger must make of the term in question. What becomes visible here is that such improper reference to Bestimmung in the context of the question of being can only be accounted for if the manifold forms of determination are no longer gathered together according to the traits of letting something be seen from itself as itself, or from the negative modalities thereof. In other words, another model must be found than that by which determination properly points out essences or of things as such. The limits of the originary synthesis of Stimmung would come even more poignantly into view were one to emphasize the numerous terms Heidegger summons in being and time that have the root part Stimm. From both a subject-related and a performative perspective, all these words and notions contribute to the thought of Stimmung and ultimately to that of being. It is not a question, as one may easily infer, of faulting Heidegger's achievement in being and time. And especially not of there being linguistic limits to properly expressing something that has already been properly thought. Rather, it is to argue that the rigorous development of something, like an originary synthesis, that would account for all forms of determinations, cannot be but flounder, not only because of its inevitable resource to improper usage of the terms to be derived, but also because of the variety of ways in which these terms must be used, do not fall under the binary oppositions that organize the various stages in the deduction. Still, the very idea of an originary synthesis calls upon us to think together this inescapable floundering. And what in such floundering is positively achieved? Yet Heidegger's evocation of floundering in commonness as part of the high and dangerous game of thinking and speaking does not master the diversity and disparity of all the ways in which Stimme is being said. The binary opposition of the proper and improper, of the habitual and the common meaning of words, and perhaps of philosophical thought and common sense. Cannot serve to bring order to the manifold in question. If thought flounders when we try to come to grips with determination, it is because the very necessity of formulating an originary synthesis, such as Stimmung, for instance, cannot avoid producing a proliferation of precisely what has to be derived. A plurality of not only improper, but also sharply different notions of determination. And by root related words. different because of tone, style, tense, and in particular levels of argumentation. A certain lack of coherence thus comports with the coherence that Stimmung makes. This incoherence, which the philosophical schemes of derivation and binary opposition fail to master, must nonetheless be accounted for. Stimmung as the ultimate a priori of all connecting would indeed have to be the starting point for such an elucidation of the way in which Stimmung itself comports with a certain incoherence. It is an incoherence that, unlike the improper, does not stand in a symmetric relation to its opposite, and that thus escapes binary determination. Hence, the kind of accounting that I call for cannot consist of tying originary Stimmung up with such things as Stimmungslosigkeit, Verstimmung, etc. Which Heidegger in chapter 29 has effectively accounted for. Nor can it be a question of linking Stimmung to some equi-primordial disunity. Discord, disharmony, etc. which Heidegger in chapter 29 has effectively accounted for. Nor can it be a question of linking Stimmung to some equi-primordial disunity. Discord, disharmony. If these values continue to receive their meaning from within the horizon, very important, of unity, harmony, etc. Rather, it is a question of tying Stimmung as a originary synthesis and its successful derivation of Bestimmung and Übereinstimmung. To the floundering of thinking, not only to the improper common use of stim-related terms, that result from the phrase regiments and the metaleptical shifts in argumentation that are required in demonstrating the originarity of Stimmung in the first place. Such floundering does not take place in improperness or impropriety. It is a floundering congenital with the dangerous game of thought Heidegger talked about. If this game consists in establishing Stimmung as the originary synthesis for all possible Bestimmung, then to tie this game up with the manifold and heterogeneous occurrences of Stimm-related words in being and time. Would mean to think the becoming of Stimmung, the coming into its own originary Stimme, from a beyond not only of its synthetic achievement, its character of state mind, but also of its possible verbalization. Beyond the minimal cohering of Stimmung and Stimme, in the Stimmung or Anstimmung, perhaps, a mesh of relations would thus emerge that would no longer be simply attuned, synthetic, or originary. Rather than seeking some sort of accordance, some even deeper Stimmen between Stimmung and the manifold voices in Heidegger's text. The accounting in question would instead have to take the form of a mesh of what Heidegger on several occasions has referred to as a Geflecht. Goes to show that you cannot, as is done in modern days, construct concepts by seeing what they are not, sort of a reference to its contradiction. That becomes the determinate. That is the definite, what we think is sharp, exact, and clear. Exactly the clearness that you find in the term enlightenment. That clarity is an absolute illusion, Heidegger shows. It is very far from clarity. It is a distance, and probably most horrid of all, it hardly even has a derivative character. It is not even derived from being. And although it probably has some roots in being, it's so randomized, random, so by chance, so much cut out from your understanding that you can never go from the definite, exact, or the understanding that a concept can be understood from its opposites. A good way of thinking of that is to take a dictionary, which can be to some extent a helpful heuristic. But if you start thinking that you can sort of learn from it, that learning is taking the form of contradictions. For in a way, all the words in a dictionary are defined in contrast to each other, even though a definition is a table has 4 legs and used for putting trays on. There is a negativity hiding somewhere. Yes, it's not a chair, it's not a wall, it's not a human being. It is inanimate, but most usually organic, especially in Sweden. But to think that this can give you knowledge of anything, it cannot even in the most far-fetched derived manner. Although a dictionary or encyclopedia can be very helpful, but note, it is mostly helpful in discussions or in those rare instances when your knowledge is so deep and broad in the area concerned that you have the right zu handen, so to speak. You have the skill, because skill is very important here. But do read the dictionary directly or the encyclopedia. Your growing self-pride and self-estimation of all the knowledge you have, to some degree, in a very superficial manner, testable at the exams of the new universities in neo-academia. That can never ever be the same as understanding, knowing. It is not connected to being, because it has to start with the why question. And if it doesn't, you have started a journey, so to speak, on the wrong leg. Or better, you are taking a boat journey using compass, sextant and map, but you forgot to take note of your point of origin, your departure point. You will be more and more damned, and your own illusionary, self-illusionary conception that you have knowledge. Yes, even worse when it's that illusion is something you're going to share with everyone else. You will continue stubbornly on your journey, and you will not reach new heavens this way. There, the metaphor with a journey ends, because this trip out in the definiteness, exactness, specificity denies reality. This journey might even be such that it is not a journey you can ever return from. So you see, the boat journey, there is always a chance that you get somewhere, and there is a chance to get back home. But in this example, the more you lose your reality touch, or the body if you like, the less your words will count for others and yourself. And your thinking will not be thankful anymore. It will be a chore. It will be a mangling mechanical wheelbarrow that you twist and turn like thousands of dictionaries, and you think you have knowledge. Another way of seeing this is, you can put it in artificial intelligence. And this is the reason so many people today, still, even though it's diminished quite heftily the last 2 decades, but still I would say the grand majority. And when you come out to common sense people, the absolute majority think that intelligence, knowledge, can be of a computer. The reason not is put in this text. Bestimmung and definiteness is after the fact. In that way, it is strictly not a knowing of the world. It's not a construction, it's not a projection or a map. It is exactly as Heidegger says, there's no other way of saying it. It's a definiteness, it's a distinctiveness, clarity. And together with these things, also simultaneously grows the venomous idea that this is how thinking should proceed. And since All instances you ever take up in the world will confirm exactly that. You see how dangerous, in a way, this illusion is. It's like the stare. You begin to stare and you feel you cannot stop. And the stare is scary, it's eerie, it's otherworldly. It gives you and other people a chill, sort of stop midway. It's a fixation. Well, I could add a third comparison. I think this would be even more helpful. Edward de Bono made an investigation in the 90s, and it turned out that almost 100% of academia thought that you could reach to new ideas through established rational laws, logic, syllogisms, deduction, induction. Although it is proven beyond all doubt that this could never happen. It is also a thinking fault, which is worse. Each of us have sometime committed that error. We have to do it ourselves. Yes, of course we were affected by our environment, parents and history of mistakes, especially the last 3 centuries. But the choice is in the end yours. And once you understand that you made that choice yourself, it did not come from the outside. You were encouraged but not forced. That is a whole world of difference. It changes everything. And I would say it gives two things that can come up now. We're now directly after the reading. The first thing is that it will strengthen all the concepts you already have. The second, more encompassing and shocking to yourself, is that you will reach into who you are. You will find yourself. Because this distant, non-present knowing is taking away yourself from yourself. So I don't 100% agree with Douglas Hofstadter that consciousness is a loop, but there is a most definite point to it. And I would say it's a loop when it's working well. When it's not working, the sort of round loop never reaches back to reflect. That's where the problem starts. I will start with a little reflection of the book by Erwin Chargaff. I've been wanting to get into that book for ages now. So Christmas Eve is a time as good as ever in fulfilling those unfulfilled wishes. And of course I also recently heard Ian McGilchrist once more mention it on his fantastic podcasts and interviews. The famed work is Heraclitean Fire, Sketches from a Life Before Nature by Erwin Chargaff. And this is the review of a book, which I often think is the best way to approach a book, with some prejudice. So you don't go to the book without any presupposition. Let's do it the Heideggerian way. Let's prime ourselves. It starts like this, by Joseph S. Fruton. Erwin Chargaff is a biochemist who had made notable contributions to the study of bacterial lipids, blood coagulation, and the microbial oxidation of inositils. Before he began research on nucleic acids after the last Great War, the stimulus for this shift of interest came from wartime work on rickettsias, and more importantly from the memorable 1944 paper by Avery, MacLeod and McCarthy on the DNA nature of the pneumococcal transforming factor. As a well-trained biochemist, Chargaff quickly recognized that to understand the biological specificity of nucleic acids and their role in heredity, as made evident in Avery's paper, it was necessary first to determine quantitatively the nucleotide composition of nucleic acids from various biological sources. With great scientific acumen, Chargaff chooses to characterize it as luck. He and his able associates took advantage of new developments in the technique of chromatography and the availability of the first commercial photoelectric spectrophotometer. By 1950, they had completed the demolition of the so-called tetranucleotide theory of nucleic acid structure, had shown that DNAs from different organisms differ in their nucleotide composition, and had discovered a striking regularity in the analytical data. As Chargaff wrote at the time, with commendable caution, it is noteworthy whether this is more than accidental. Cannot yet be said that in all the deoxypentose nucleic acids examined so far, the molar ratios of total purines to total pyrimidines and also of adenine to thymine and guanine to cytosine. Were not far from 1. This seminal sentence is quoted in Chargaff's book at the start of a section entitled "The Miracle of Complementarity." I do not believe in miracles, and suspect that in 1950 Chargaff did not either. But the exemplary phrasing of this conclusion, later accepted as a biological truth, and I have to add the end of theism, end of quote, reflects understandable reluctance to succumb to the hypnotic power of numerology. Whose peril had been demonstrated only a few years before in the downfall of the Bergman-Niemann periodicity hypothesis of protein structure. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick published their 2 famous notes in Nature, in which they proposed a structure for DNA, in which 2 polynucleotide chains are held together in a double helix by hydrogen bonding between the 2 complementary purine-pyrimidine pairs, and also stated that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. The subsequent explosive development of molecular genetics based on the pairing rules is common knowledge. After the award of 1962 of Nobel Prizes to Watson and Crick, which they shared with Maurice Wilkins, and even more after the appearance of Watson's autobiographical bestseller, The Double Helix. DNA became a household name. Among the many reviews of Watson's book was one by Chargaff, whose critical comments elicited a spate of interest and revealing letters, including three from Max Perutz, Wilkins and Watson. Chargaff states that he told them all he knew about pairing rules and expresses the view that the double-stranded model of DNA came about as a consequence of our conversation. The fact remains, however, that Watson and Crick were the first to propose this model and is not altered by their failure to acknowledge Chargaff's help. What is at issue is the manner in which scientists behave toward one another, and how recognition and rewards are distributed among the people who participate in an important scientific development. Give me a second here to pause. In Chargaff's book, you can also read that he's very critical of not only the stealing of ideas between scientists, something that is encouraged by rewards, general popularity and affections, but also very, very, very critical of the over-specialization in science and loss of ethical values. Sorry. Chargaff's vision is apocalyptic, and he offers a preachment pleading for a return to a smaller, less professional style of scientific life. The pervasive note is one of pessimism, and I suspect that he is opposed even to the kind of optimism that appeals to history to justify the claim that although some people's worlds have been destroyed in the past, other worlds rose in their place. He clearly opposes reductionism, relativism, and positivism, and advocates a sort of nature worship. More common among poets than among experimental scientists like Chargaff, who devoted their lives to the study of dead materials wrenched from living organisms. A distinct quality of the book is its aphoristic literary style, marked by mordant wit and studded with paradox and puns that often border on buffoonery. The literary erudition displayed on nearly every page is immense and will oblige most readers to make frequent use of a good encyclopedia if they wish to understand Chargaff's allusions. There are many similarities between Chargaff and Paul Feyerabend, actually a fellow Austrian. And I think this is something that could be used as an example of what science does indirectly by its comparting things is shield us from understanding the world. Yes, this is a view Chargaff and Feyerabend shared, that when science is left to its own doing, that has been the last century and a half, it will hide reality. Chargaff is from Czernowitz, or Czarnowici. That place is today in Ukraine, war affected, and Paul Feyerabend was a Viennese chap. How is it possible that they are of the same nationality, bearing the same passport? Well, science would never, from a now position, be able to explain that, because we all know science stays shy from history and time. We don't know history and time, and therefore from our knowledgeable placement it will be impossible to understand that thing, because science deals with facts. Another aspect is science sort of put itself in different cells, like a monastery, work with isolation and say, thermodynamics has nothing to do with hydrodynamics or magnetic field theory, thereby creating an illusion of divided world ends, like mathematics is somehow over there, Aya, and physics is over there, and I am here, and I'm not part of neither. Things are entangled, to use a quantum mechanical word. And the reason, and here I follow the lead, the torch picked up by E. McGilchrist, Varela and Maturana, Umberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, Umberto Maturana, Paul Feyerabend, Thomas Nagel, Wittgenstein, of course, the late one, is that our unhealth today, be it put in a specific cell called mental and another cell called physical, is caused by this technological way of wanting to understand, which is just the very opposite. It's a shielding away of reality, is cutting away the branch we're sitting on. And far from being the fact that the worst thing now is the climate change caused by us human beings, the taking away of knowledge and the fixation of contradiction. This is the true cause of misery. This is the cause of wars. There is a huge difference in the numbers of wars in the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. And it has nothing to do with whether someone is more intentionally peaceful. It has to do with our understanding that contradiction is a priori true. They are secondary true, still true, but after the fact, after the tennis game, after the collapse of the superposition, can never, ever be used for thinking. Never. It's absolutely impossible. And since almost 100% of academia today, I would say, neo-academia or the new wave, doesn't share anything of the old knowledge, nothing. The words maybe, but since the words in the old way were filled with meaning and life, the new ones are just empty shells, made of contradictions, explained in what they are not. What is life, one might ask? Answer comes from nowhere. It ain't death. It is actually that demented and ignorant. This is the age of ignorance, something shared in my thinking with Chargaff, but I don't share his pessimism, not at all, because it's just the opposite. We now know what's wrong. We didn't know that only a few decades ago. We can do something about it. Contradictions will enforce a huge unconscious power on everything we do for no good reason at all, but they will not be alleviated until we understand the true working of being. Before we reach the why question, we have to make do with the what and how and where. We have absolutely no choice. And we can, as I said before, never get to the why question with the what, how and where questions. And the third thing, most terrible, we will not even know where, what, how, because they actually need the force of how, or why, I mean. Without the Seinsfrage, everything gets attenuated and flat, lifeless. Chargaff had a much valid point, but he did not, at the time of the publication of his ideas, have the full picture as we do today. That's the only difference. I will, however, go back to Chargaff and be a bit more explicit. And I think this is enough to put some prejudice into us, which is absolutely necessary to reach into the book. never go to anything without some prejudice. An open mind is an empty mind. Empty, lacking of intellectuality is the worst possible human condition. And it makes you completely dependent on instinct. What's good for the moment and what is good for you and no one else.